Welcome back to Web3 Unpacked, everyone. I'm Rich Pasqua, and joining us today is Rushi Manche, co-founder of Movement Labs, a modular move-based zero-knowledge rollup for safe blockchains. Welcome, Rushi.
Hey Rich, super thanks for having me on. Really excited to get this one going. Been watching a few of your podcasts recently. It's been phenomenal work. So it's great to hop on and kind of walk through what movement is and what we're all about.
Yeah, and thank you for the kind words. We're super thrilled to have you on the show and learn more about Movement Labs. You and I were talking a little bit before, and you've got some really interesting perspectives on programming languages, especially obviously for specifically to Web3. But we're going to get into that. I'm pretty excited to learn more from you, and I'm sure our audience will too. And Rushi, you're a software engineer by trade, and you've been working in this world for many, many years, and you've gained a pretty intense understanding of like all of the developer pain points. And I think that's really, really important for people like yourselves who are developing products and tools and systems for Web3 developers. So it's super important. Plus you have a really intense understanding of Web2. And I think that's obviously very important to understand that world because the two worlds are joined right now. And and you're basically offering real world Web3 solutions, and now you're the co-founder of Movement Labs. And one of the things we love to do is not just hear about your products and your services that you're developing, but we want to hear from you, the person, Rushi. How did you get started? How did your Web3 journey start?
Yeah, so I can start off. So I started coding when I was 14. I was always into like distributed systems, and I was a nerd geeking out on like early PHP back in the day, and then was into like coding like JavaScript websites and whatnot. I think my first main career gig was at United Health Group. Was into distributed systems, on-prem cloud migrations. Basically, back then they had two on-prem databases, and we really wanted to scale and bring essentially the biggest health giant in the world, or one of the biggest health giants in the world, and bring them to cloud infrastructure. So I really got my toes wet into cloud infrastructure, distributed systems, and more importantly, cybersecurity. When you have millions of patients and trillions on the line here, you have to be careful about how is patient data stored, who are your shareholders, and how are you communicating that effectively to your shareholders as well. So yeah, I was really involved in like the AWS team, and then kind of my journey into crypto was in early Cosmos and Ethereum communities where I was tinkering around with the CosmWasm early on. For those that aren't familiar, CosmWasm is a Rust-based programming language. So I was a Rust engineer early on. Wrote some Solidity, but honestly, I hated Solidity so much, which we'll get more into pretty soon. But yeah, I was an early engineer by trade in Web 2, got my career started in Rust-based engineering in Web 3, and then aligned myself to the moving system, which happy touching as well.
Yeah, we're going to dig into a lot of things, but you said a lot of cool, interesting things there.
Yep.
Healthcare, cybersecurity, you're starting off with dealing with very, very large pools of very sensitive data.
Yep.
And handling that is really like you're cutting your teeth on a lot of important details in that world. And cybersecurity comes up pretty much every podcast because it's like one of the top things, and we're going to definitely hit on that. And then kind of near and dear to my heart, and a lot of friends of the podcast here are on the CosmWasm or the Cosmos ecosystem, like Andromeda Protocol, right? Good friends of the podcast. I did a lot of work with them in the past, and it really is a very, very interesting ecosystem. But we'll get into that. But and we're going to break down everything a little bit more. But can you give us like the 40,000 foot kind of elevator pitch of what you're about?
Yep. So every year there's $4.5 billion lost in DeFi. This is mainly through smart contract hacks, ransomware attacks, integer overflows. Basically, if you're a random developer or like a not experienced developer, it's really difficult to write good quality, high performance code. And even at the highest level, we're talking about Curve, Kyber, Uniswap, 92% of all EVM protocols on the market today are at risk of getting hacked. So we take a step back and look at that. It's clear that the user experience and security for today's on-chain DeFi is fundamentally broken. So movement is the first step to Ethereum's advancements in smart contract security, especially at the formal verification level. So for those that aren't familiar, Move was derived from Facebook's DM project. Essentially, Facebook wanted to have a stable coin to power its millions of users on the Facebook app. They looked at the EVM, realized it was broken, looked at the SVM, realized it was good, but not the best, and wanted to build a new VM from scratch. That was a Libra project.
Mm.
Because of regulation, it's spun on to Aptos and Sui, two leading L1s, and I was an early builder in Aptos. And Movement's mission is taking all the principles from this Facebook's project, the most secure and fastest VM in the market, and bring it to Ethereum where there's liquidity, users, and a Web3 native community. So kind of like you touched on here, bringing all the best of Web2 with all the best of Web3 in this overlapping Venn diagram to Ethereum.
Mm. And just for our listeners, and and for myself, but I've been digging a
Yep.
little bit into movement, obviously, but just an acronym check here. M1, because this is on your site and some of
Yep.
your communications. M1 is the Movement Labs own blockchain, right?
Yep. So
M2,
M2, you
yeah,
go.
go ahead.
Yeah, M2 is the main layer 2. It's a move layer 2 on Ethereum. M1 is purely a shared sequencer that powers layer 2.
Mm, got you. And then VM is virtual machine, and EVM is obviously
Yep.
Ethereum virtual machine.
Correct.
So good, yeah, and I'm sure our audience probably knows that. But yeah, and it's interesting, a technology that Facebook, who
Yep.
otherwise really were on the periphery of Web3 for a very, very long time, actually developed something that is really, really secure
Yep.
and useful. And now you're kind of almost deconstructing it in a way and
Yep.
taking all the best pieces out and enabling that through the blockchain. That's awesome. And
Yep.
now the benefits, you mentioned security is one of the best, the top benefits. Are there any other
Yep.
benefits to developers by
Yeah,
using
so
the DM protocol?
I think like parallelization is one of the hottest topics in crypto today. Basically, Solana started this craze with obviously meme coins and tokens being traded at a high velocity. But the thesis is you want multiple threaded processing, you want low fee markets. So what the main benefit of Move is obviously security, but the real benefit is block STM, which for those that aren't familiar is the main consensus engine used for parallelization. So in the DM project, they really pioneered this principle called block STM, which is optimistic parallelization. Today, like Monad, Aptos, Sui, these leading L1s all use some kind of variants of this technology. So the Move language and movement brings this parallelization, high throughput, the ability to over 30,000 transactions per second to Ethereum. And it kind of differentiates itself with the security aspect.
Mm. Yeah, and just to touch on security a little bit more, and for our viewers and listeners a little bit here, and myself, can you help us understand kind of the smart contract vulnerabilities within Ethereum? It's really important because everyone's like, oh, Ethereum, I'm trading it, I'm doing, or I'm developing on it, but they don't understand that there are vulnerabilities. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that affects the ecosystem in
Yeah.
general?
So I think we can look at a few case studies for this answer. If you
Mm.
look at the DAO attack, one of the biggest attacks back in the day. If you look at Curve recently, if you look at Kyber recently, if you go to Peck Shield, which is like a Twitter account, and you look at like the recent posts, like every 2 days they'll say like Arbitrum hack for $50 million, Blast hack for $50 million. There's a new hack almost every other day at this point, and oftentimes if you analyze those patterns, it's the same issues. So for example, at Reentry, it's the same as a common concept, which took down the DAO, took down Kyber, took down Curve. These major blue chip protocols have been audited for millions and millions of dollars with some of the best teams on the planet and still getting hacked. This is because the EVM actually has no runtime verification, where if I deploy a smart contract today in the EVM, there's no firewall for crypto. in Web 2, if you have a virus coming into your laptop, you have like Norton or some of these other actors that was like, hey, there's a virus coming and probably shouldn't let the software be downloaded, right? In Web 3, there's no such principle where if I deploy a smart contract, it's pretty much, okay, if there's integer overflow, a research attack, or some attack vulnerability, it will simply get published in mainnet, and then some hacker from another part of the world will use that vulnerability and then take $50 million out in the blink of an eye. So what's the problem today in the EVM is A, there's no security checks, so there's no firewall for crypto, and B, for the new upcoming developer, it's really difficult to write secure code. It takes days, months, tens of thousands of dollars auditing fees to even potentially write maybe secure code. And even that, you have a high risk of attack. So the move thesis was, how do you make sure that you can have formal verification at runtime? So how do you make sure they have an auditor checking your code at runtime so that these attacks are much less prone to occur?
Mm. Yeah, and it makes perfect sense. It's like you're pre-checking everything,
Yep, exactly.
with an understanding of new attack methodologies in place before you even release.
Yep.
It's a wonderful thing. That's great. Yeah, and you meant we talked about the Cosmos, but and your Move is on the top ecosystems like Ethereum and
Yep.
Avalanche and whatnot. Do you see what other ecosystems are you going to be targeting down the road?
Yeah, so I think the main focus for the entity, Labs entity, is Ethereum. We came from the L1 ecosystem and realized that Ethereum, it has the benefits of liquidity, right? It has the benefits of users. Most DeFi volume is still on Ethereum through one shape or form today, either through L2 solutions or mainnet itself. Most of like the whales and people who have been involved for over a decade now still rely on Ethereum as the main go-to solution. So when you look at that and you understand that other layer ones have often a difficulty in cold start problem, where especially if you're a non-EVM, it's very difficult for family offices, liquid funds, or third parties to really trust the network. Ethereum has been around for years, has most research around it. So the question is, how can we scale execution on top of that? So the Movement Labs entity is purely focused on driving research and development into the Ethereum development. But what's interesting is that we have a stack that's composable for other ecosystems. So we actually have teams launching Move L2s on Bitcoin. We have teams launching Move L2s on Filecoin. Teams launching social Rollup. So it's really an open design space for any team to come in and adapt their own use case. But for the labs point of view, we're purely focused on Ethereum.
Interesting. Yeah, and wow, Bitcoin and all these social. That's a pretty that's growing. It's really cool
Yep.
that you have teams kind of building out, because you don't want to just kind of wedge yourself into one type of environment. You want to kind of spread a wider net. So that's great.
Yep.
Now, in going through some of your collateral and your information on your site, and talking to you a little bit, the idea of modularity comes up, and being from a design, software, not so much designing the software, but UX UI design myself, modularity, and handling content or large flows of content is really, really important, right, to the design process. Um, for our audiences, can you give us a quick explanation of what a modular blockchain actually is?
Yep. So a modular blockchain is a specific blockchain designed for a use case. So I think Celestia kind of pioneered this narrative where they create the first modular blockchain designed for data availability. The pain point in this case was that Ethereum was too expensive. If you're building rollups on Ethereum, sending call data to mainnet Ethereum was very expensive. Celestia pioneered the modular blockchain for data availability to make sure there's an alternative DA to post call data or post transaction data to make the cost of transactions on Ethereum much cheaper. But modularity is much more bigger than this DA. Rather, it's actually a subset of any kind of tech. If you look at, let's say, modularity within a website, you have like AWS Lambda functions, you have React Native front ends, you have essentially Node.js backends. Anyone who's built in Web2 world knows that modularity is everything, right? You want the ability to swap out providers, swap out users, swap out different experiences so that if one provider goes down, you're not handicapped to the rest of the chain.
Mm.
Monolithic is a contrarian bet to this, where it's like the Solanas, the Aptos, Suites, even the Ethereum main of the world, where it's an end-to-end composed stack built by one single entity, which is often how technology evolves, right? You start off with the one single provider that builds an end-to-end experience. Then the next wave is modular, where you find providers that build specific use cases and provide solvency for one niche. And the last iteration is kind of what we're pioneers, integrated thesis. So if you have monolithic and modular in this Venn diagram, the overlap is integrated, where you can take multiple modular pieces combined and bring them for one user experience. So my best example is a car, right? If you look at any modern day car today, it's composed of parts from multiple different providers. The engines from one manufacturer, the chassis from manufacturer. They're all different modular pieces with from foundations and labs that focus on one entity. And once they combine, it's one unified or integrated experience, which is a car. So in the case of blockchains today, like you have Celestia for DA, you have EigenDA for DA, you have different VMs, you have the Move VM, Solana VM, EVM, you have different sequencers. So the question is, how do you make that palpable for users? And the integrated experience combines the best of all modular experiences for one enhanced execution.
Mm. Yeah, it's like the argument of multi-chain, right?
Yeah.
Even if you look at Cosmos, like just to go back in time a little bit, when you had certain exchanges kind of imploding, it
Yep.
pretty much was trying to basically take down the entire Cosmos with it. Um, and those who were developing for multi-chain were kind of safe. So the idea of modularity and the freedom of choice to work with different vendors or tools or other protocols is fantastic and is kind of a necessity actually for Web3
Yep.
to kind of keep moving and moving quickly. That's awesome. And one of the things that I know you're Roshi, you're kind of opinionated on a
Yep.
few things as far as languages, and I love it. I like when people are kind of like super energetic about and passionate about driving industries or their industries in a certain direction. Now, you know, in the long term, what languages do you feel will bubble up to the top? Right. So you've got Solidity, Rust. There's a tons of things going on. Solidity and Rust really being the main Web3
Yep.
languages. What do you think will bubble up, or are there new players?
I think I'll take a step back and look at Web 2, right? So when Web 2 started, you have like assembly, you have these low bytecode languages. And then you had like PHP, which no one really liked. Then you had like JavaScript, which people didn't really like, but still was like relatively good. But the unlocking point was when JavaScript had multiple frameworks on top of it, right? So you had like React, you had like Vue, you had Angular, three major frameworks that derive from the JavaScript library. And now we have high powered websites that we can spin up in 5 minutes. I think blockchain's got the similar experience where Solidity is more analogous to PHP. A lot of the previous Rails are built on like Ruby and PHP. I mean, like Facebook today is largely built on Ruby. That is like the legacy code for the past generation, right? So for like Aave, Uniswap, Curve, Compound, these are all Solidity last generation applications that honestly serve their purpose, doing a great job. Security could be better, but largely people are happy with the experiences they're seeing there today. The next generation of DeFi, and I publicly tweet about this a lot, is how do we get enhanced new user experience? How do we have fully on-chain trading? How do we have vaults that aren't getting hacked for $4.5 billion every year? How do we have trading experiences for retail consumers so they don't even know they're trading for like SocialFi? These things are only really possible on next generation languages and frameworks, which is ultimately Rust. So my analogy is like PHP and Ruby is to Solidity as Rust-based languages are to JavaScript in Web 2.
Yeah.
So with that lens, you have Rust-based languages. You have Move and Solana VM as two main frameworks, similar to like React and Vue for JavaScript. Move and SVM are the two best ways to really build blockchains, design applications due to high throughput capacities, as well as the security benefits. And the trade-off is obviously it's a newer language. It takes more time for this adoption, which we can touch as well. But my general thesis is over the next 3 to 4 years, you will see Rust-based frameworks, languages, and development skyrocket. You're even seeing this in the Ethereum community today. Like George's from Paradigm is really big on Reth and has been posting a lot of Reth clients, and we're seeing a lot of high throughput advantages there. And over like clients itself are also using optimizing for Rust, and even like non-crypto like AI has been really adopting Rust as well. So I think in the next 3 or 4 years we'll see a Rust boom.
Interesting. Yeah, and it's kind of interesting you brought up AI and the adoption of Rust, or the union of Rust and AI. That's really cool, and I'd love to talk to you more about that at another time, or investigate that deeply. And that's interesting because, I've met, tons of people who are like, in the Solidity camp or the Rust camp, and if you're Rust, it's, your heads down, and that's
Yep.
it for you guys. There is like, the developer communities are very, very, very hardcore on what they are, what they're
Yep.
studying and doing. And Rust, I just hear all the time. It's just booming. It's keep going, to your point. Now, with that said, Rust and Solidity, these are not, it's not JavaScript. I mean, there are analogies that you made, and I thought those were great.
Yep.
It's not that learning these languages are really, really intense, right?
Yep.
And it's an investment, like real investment for, whether you're 15 years old or 50 years old, I don't care who you
Yep.
are, it's an investment. So now, how do you get, like, because you're a proponent of certain languages, obviously you're building in certain languages. How do you get the developer community to kind of migrate in one direction or another?
Yeah, so I think the way we look at it is we're not asking anyone to migrate. With movement, we're fully even compatible with the bytecode level.
Hmm.
So in the short term, we acknowledge that most liquidity, most Web3 developers are Solidity and will be Solidity for the next 6 months. So such that we have full end-to-end even compatibility. If you're an EVM developer, you deploy Solidity smart contract, it will fully compile down to move bytecode and launch the VM, and have the same parallelization benefits. But we do acknowledge the superior frameworks in the long term, which is Move. So over the next 3 to 4 years, we're driving new adoptions through hackathons, accelerators, growth programs. And we work pretty closely with Aptos Labs, who's a core partner and investors here, to drive adoption for Move. The general thesis is from a market's point of view, you have three allegedly multi-billion-dollar protocols pushing the Move adoption in that Aptos suite and movement. Whereas like SVM, you used to have pretty much Solana, maybe Eclipse, kind of pushing SVM adoption. But with Move, you really have multiple layer ones, multiple layer twos, and developers really waking up to this. And then from a sentiment point of view, it is Facebook's language, right? Everyone in crypto is trying to get Facebook on chain. So my rebuttal is, why don't you use Facebook's language? So yeah, I think that's where we're seeing a lot of growth. Aptos is the fast growing non EVM, and TVL for both Aptos and Sui has been skyrocketing. We're seeing a lot of organic users coming in the movie system. So to answer your question quickly, short term, we're catering to EVM developers, onboarding and migrating EVM mindshare to movement. And then long term, we're encouraging the growth of Move developers.
Mm. That's great. Yeah, it's not like if then this. It's
Yep.
not one or the other. It's a migration of it, and it's interesting because a lot of products and protocols that I speak with week over week, a lot of the up education and the kind
Yep.
of adoption and community building is done through hackathons, which I think is
Yep.
fantastic. Now, as far as EVM, I read somewhere, Roshi, that you called it hot garbage.
Yeah.
What's the story behind that? Why are you so passionate about that?
I mean, you can ask even like I think Nick from Fuel is the most spoken about this as well. Like Nick was one of the first builders of like the EVM space, and most of the people in the early Ethereum space recognized the EVM wasn't good. It was more of like a hot fix to get Ethereum up as soon as possible. The TLDR is I can go on and on about this, but if you haven't written Solidity code, it is quite difficult to do so. Not even on like the language learning model, but like how do you write account checks, for example? To write account checks in Solidity, it takes about three, 4 or 5 pages of code for one single account check. SVM takes about like I would say 50 to 70 lines, and then Move it can be done in 8 to 10 lines. So the developer speed for EVM is very slow. Where if I'm a new developer, if I'm a 21-year-old college kid, I can't really learn Solidity, deploy code to mainnet, and accelerate quickly. there's a whole learning curve. I need to spend time learning Solidity. I have to work with auditors, pay like 50 grand for to get audited, and then maybe, just maybe, I might ship a code in 3 or 4 months. And by then, the trend has already passed. If you look at Web 2, what gets me up and going is, how do you get a Zuckerberg Facebook experience? Zuckerberg was able to be in his college dorm, pretty much work on like Facebook, get up to market within 3 weeks, and got it stress tested, right? And he went viral. That is not fundamentally possible in the EVM, because if you do that, you will get hacked, and you will lose all your customers, because it's such a finance oriented app, finance oriented culture. So with the security risks, with the low velocity productions, it creates EVM is pretty awful in go to market. And technical point of view, I'm sure like if you take a look through it, like the semantics are pretty awful. Doing compiler checks are pretty awful. So there's a lot of issues with the EVM, but it is obviously revolutionary, right? It's like Bitcoin script, where you have to pay homage. You have to still recognize that inspired smart contract programming in general, but it is time for change. It's like PHP.
Mm. Yeah, I mean it's not revolution, it's evolution, right? So
Yep.
you still have to kind of, like you said, pay homage to the platforms and the languages that you've been developing on for many years to move
Yep.
forward. So that's
Yep.
great. Now, what does what does what does Q3 and Q4 look like? What does your roadmap look like for Movement Labs?
Yeah, so we'll be launching testnet this month, ideally, with main goals of launching mainnet sometime in Q3, Q4. We're super excited to onboard the ecosystem and projects and really build the momentum that we're seeing. We have over 200 members in our Move Builders chat. We're seeing a lot of variances from Move AVSs on Eigenlayer. We're seeing Move Bitcoin rollups. We're seeing AI projects. We've seen this whole world of next gen development that pretty much no ecosystem has touched so far.
Mm.
So we're super excited to unlock like, new use cases and work with builders one to one. And we're announcing Accelerator as well. So if you're a builder listening to this, I'm chronically online, so you can like pretty much mess with me anytime. And we connect you to Accelerator we're doing, where we'll one-on-one work on with you, give you funding, give you resources, mentorship, and help you scale your business 0 to 1.
Yeah, and being out in front and centered as a founder like you're doing right now
Yep.
is hyper important. And I'll just echo what Rushi said. Hit him up. If you
Yep.
really want to learn about this stuff, or you need solutions that you want to investigate, reach out and talk to him. And with that said, we also here at Web3 Unpacked, we like to understand your ecosystem, meaning your development community. What does it look like? Is it localized? Is it global?
Yeah, so like we have a pretty global approach. We're headquartered in San Francisco, so
Mm,
most of the labs team and entity team is based in the States. But I think like what we're seeing is a vast uproar in India markets, APAC markets, and Africa markets, really, and with some kind of trace in like Brazil, Latin as well. Um, like obviously, like more of like the users today for crypto are more beneficial to global markets, where decentralized finance isn't as accessible. So kind of like what gets me up and going is, how do we make DeFi secure for markets that aren't used to finance? How do we make sure that they have equitable and secure financial operations? So in terms of developer adoption, I would say Korea, Southeast Asia, Taiwan, Nigeria recently, Morocco, and areas of Latin America have been really big for us. And yeah, I think like, we're seeing a lot of uproars, a lot of projects, and native builders. Indonesia, especially, is a very active and vocal community, and we're driving a lot of growth there.
Yeah, the regions you brought up, Rushi, is it echoes a lot of the other like DeFi and other Web3
Yep.
development environments as well, or protocols and companies. So that's good. And it's interesting to see where like these new technologies are being adopted and who's doing
Yep.
it and at what speed. So Asia definitely is really off and running. South America, there's a necessity there. There's actually a huge need for DeFi and tokenizing assets at speed.
Yep.
Um, now, so that's good. Now, in the world of Web3, we know you're excited about your
Yep.
products. Outside of your product, in the world of Web3, what are you really excited about?
I think we're like obviously with infrastructure, there's a lot of fatigue. Whereas like 50 EVML2s that don't really have much product differentiation. I
Mm.
think we're kind of leading the charge in terms of breaking that norm, where the EVM finally has a competitor, where there's people thinking, okay, is there a broader landscape for design? And then touching back to your point in modularity, the point of modularity from Ethos' point of view is how do you bring experimentation to broader markets? So in the past, that was data availability, sequencers, as ZK proofs and whatnot, and now we're seeing experimentation execution layer. And we're kind of leading the packet movement where we're focused on the Move VM, focused on Facebook's execution environment, and bringing that tech to Ethereum. So I think like developers of crypto waking up to alternative execution environments, waking up to high throughput capacities is very exciting for us at Movement.
Mm. Awesome. And yeah, I mean, there's so many things to be excited about,
Yep.
but DeFi obviously is the big mover and shaker these days. But
Yep.
I mean, AI, obviously, the integration of AI and Web3 is profound, and we're just getting kicked off with that. So
Yep.
there's a lot to be excited about in the near future and the long-term future. But a little bit of news about Movement Labs. Actually, it's pretty big news for you guys, and you secured $38 million in Series A funding. That's really, really impressive. And from firms like Hack VC, Placeholder, Archetype, Maven 11, and tons more, because many of our audience members here are starting businesses, whether it's in Web 2 or Web 3, they're looking for funding, and they're running their own, projects or whatever, and they're actively fundraising, right? So can you give us a glimpse into what your fundraising journey or process was like?
Yeah. So I think like, I mean, me and Cooper dropped out of college like 2 years ago to build Movement. So it wasn't really like the easiest path for us. This was post FTX when pretty much
Yeah.
everyone in crypto that was fake left for AI, and then like the people that were in didn't really believe in non EVM. So we really struggled for a while. We were two idiot college kids out of a dorm room in Nashville, Tennessee. So didn't have the best network, didn't have the flashy PhD, didn't have the nice Google resume. We were just hungry college kids. So we started off just really trying to figure out what we were, build a POC, kind of build a pitch deck, white paper, get our narrative out there, meet people and network. I would say we probably took over 750 no's before our first yes, which as an individual is very difficult to do. Going weeks in and weeks in with everyone saying you're just a kid, you don't have experience, you don't know what you're doing. But I think that resilience, perseverance really shows off to a lot of people where they're like, he's been around for long, he's been doing this, why don't we give him a shot? So we got some of our early investors who took a shot on us very early on, believed in us as individuals, and long term really led to us to kind of build up this hype momentum where it became more easier to fundraise, became easier to become a household name, and today Movement is what it is. But yeah, I think the biggest lesson and takeaway that I would give to anyone listening is just be ready if you're a new builder, your new experience, be ready to fail and embrace it. Failing is part of the journey. It's the only way you're going to learn. It's actually the only way people will respect you.
Amazing points in there, Rushi. And if you're not winning, you better be learning, right?
Yep.
So, and to start, like literally, not even like while you're in college,
Yep.
that's a very familiar story, but there's only a handful of people that actually
Yep.
really, really make that happen, and we know who they are, right? So,
Yep.
um, it's daring to do what you did,
Yep.
to not have as much business acumen right out of the gate, but you
Yep.
learned, and that's what you do. And over time, as you mentioned, your story became more refined.
Yep.
The metrics became more in clarity, in
Yep.
focus. Um, and you started to learn. You and your partners started to learn from each
Yep.
other and your mistakes and your obviously successes, and that's really what it takes, and it's perseverance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then once one VC nibbles, then
Yep.
everyone, it's like throwing blood in the water, right?
Yep.
Ooh, there must be something interesting here, and who wants to
Yep.
be the leader in the funding? And then you get into little back and forth with different funders.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. It's really important information for our listeners that, you know,
Mhm.
you can't give up. If you've got a product
Yep.
that you really like, you got to keep going. And that's, you know, par for the course with many, many things, not just, you know, Web3 technology. So that's
Yep.
awesome. Now, as we wrap up a little bit, Rushi, you know, where can like development community or just passive users find you and get involved?
Yeah, so I'm at Rushi Manche on Twitter. If you look at RUSHIMANCHE on Twitter, you can follow Movement Labs XYZ on Twitter as well. We're pretty active and post nearly every day, kind of what we're doing, what we're up to. Yeah, I think so far so good.
Yeah, and Rushi, I'm gonna post all of your links in all of our, you know, published communications,
Cool.
so everyone will be able to hit you and Movement Labs as well. And if
Yep.
you're in the development community, check them out, because this is really, really interesting. This is a nice bridge within some major languages for Web3. So check them out. They're doing some really interesting things. Rushi, I'm very much interested in tracking you guys. I love to kind of track new technologies and people like yourself and innovators like yourself who are trying to make Web3 a better, more seamless place to operate and
Sure.
build. So thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you back again and extending the communications.
Thanks so much, Rich. I really appreciate your time.